Tennessee in the United States, as we discussed the Niger coup crisis, on countries uprising and what Ecowas must do to ensure that peace continues in West Africa and indeed Africa, is Her Excellency Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao, former permanent representative to the African Union Mission in Washington, D.C.
For a long time, when it comes to France, it was just a matter of time. What's happening now in Africa is a revolution similar to what saw the demise of the mighty Roman Empire, a revolution similar to what we saw with the fall of the mighty British Empire. There is no way that the West would have continued to exploit and plunder African natural resources, abuse the Africans for as long as they have. The end is here, and I hope France does see the writing on the wall. This is just the beginning of the African Revolution, and it is not going to stop. I think that France has gotten away with a lot over the years, and it's not just France, most of the Western powers for that matter. But I would hope that they would see that what's happening in Niger and what has happened in the other countries in West Africa is a very significant movement that I hope the West will look at it and take a look at it and consider it very seriously in terms of their policies on Africa, their foreign policies on Africa. What they have done in the past is simply not going to work anymore.
A beacon of hope and inspiration, and thanks for standing tall for Africa. I just needed to say this to you. But I'd like to ask you this. Has the revolution truly begun? Is Africa really free? Because what we call revolution, to me, just looks like a cataclysmic action that is not directed towards anything. What we call revolution that made Central African Republic, for instance, break away from a hitherto colonial past is because of the tribal conflicts and the fight for governance going on there between the likes of Anti-Seleka, Anti-Balaka, Tudera, and some other actors. What is going on in Mali is because a leader wanted to sit tight in power and the military took over. What is going on in Guinea is the same thing. It's the same cycle of dance we've always had that made Africa, since we got independent, most nations got independent in the 1960s, to 1990 have over 110 coups. Is that not the same movement without action or movement without purpose that we are going through, that we are mistaking for a revolution? That's one to you, man.
I see what's happening in Niger, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea very differently. If you look at the previous coups, those were orchestrated by Western powers, majority, of course, orchestrated by France. They had their own intentions, in a few quite documented very well. The leaders were trying to do what was ultimately best for their people, and those leaders were assassinated. The difference between these coups are coups being led by our people. The people have spoken. The people now truly understand the issues. The people are standing up to say what has been going on is unfair, is unacceptable. It really just simply makes sense that something has got to give. There's a difference between the previous coups and these last 4 coups, especially the one in Niger. I actually, on a personal level, I feel uncomfortable even calling them coups. This is, you look at a situation where people are basically desperate, where they know they're rich in natural resources, and yet the majority of the people are extremely poor. How long can that situation be sustained before the people finally wake up and rise up? That is what's happening. And I would like to call what's happening in these 4 countries as an ideological realignment of their economic, of their political, of their social values. At some point, if you look at the situation with the former French colonies, before even a president comes to power, there are certain no-go areas that the president must not touch, because if you do, you may not live to see the end of the day. Areas like the military, areas like, of course, the finances and the reserves that must be deposited with the French treasury, areas of the natural resources. So if you are a president, an African president, who is coming to power, And you are told, as long as you stay away from discussions pertaining to their presence, military presence in the country, training of your military by France, equipping of your military by France. Don't talk about the natural resources, whose the French companies have the first right of approval. Do not talk, and make sure you continue to deposit your bank reserves with the French central bank. If you avoid those areas, then you're free to run your country any which way you want. Now, what kind of a leader is that? What environment are you going to be occupying and managing and running your country with all those major areas of economic development no longer accessible to you? And the whole thing is so mind-boggling that we have gone to, over so many years, this is 2023, that the leaders in Africa have been unable to undo the agreements that were put in place when the African countries were given their independence. It is unbelievable that to this day, you can have a country like Niger to be the second poorest country in the world, and yet all their resources are going to France. Most of Niger is not electrified, while their uranium is electrifying France and Europe. You can take one after the other after the other. At every level, it's unfair, it's unacceptable, and I don't even know how the Western powers could really go to sleep every day knowing of the carnage that the havoc they're creating in Africa, and hope that this will go on forever. The time has come. The children of Africa are now awoken. They can see clearly now, and they're simply standing up and saying, enough is enough. So yes, we don't like coups, but the last 4 coups are very different in the sense that the children of Africa are very clear, because they are the ones standing up and saying, we got to take back our country. We need to defend our turf. What's right is right. What is wrong is wrong. We can no longer continue to be exploited. That's what makes this different. It's not influenced by France. The coups are not influenced by any nation. It's simply people standing back and saying, we're taking back what belongs to us. And that's what makes these coups different. And I'm uncomfortable calling them coups. I'm calling them instead ideological realignment of our economic, political, and social values. The children have risen, and the children are speaking, and the citizens themselves are backing those who have led the uprising. And it is a warning to the Western powers that the African Revolution has begun, and those who are going to align themselves with the people are those who are going to survive the revolution that's taking place in Africa. The same is true with the African leaders as well. Those who will align themselves with the wishes of the people are the ones who are going to survive this revolution as well. I do believe the African Revolution has begun, and those who cannot see the writing on the wall, they will not survive this revolution. There is no turning back. The children of Africa are rising. The children of Africa understand the issues, and this time they're going to the streets, not along party lines. They're going to the streets united as citizens of Niger, as citizens of Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, because they understand that this particular fight has got to be dealt with from a national level, and I hope with time it'll be dealt with from a continental level, because the exploitation of the continent has got to stop. And this time it is the children of Africa who are speaking, and the world better listen up. In those discussions about having a military intervention in Niger, let me remind you that there are other coups that we are not talking about, that we should be talking about. By France forcing Niger to send all its natural resources to France, that's a coup. By France having its own military in Niger and forcing Nigerians that you can only be trained by France, that is a coup. By forcing Niger to deposit 50% of its reserves with France, that is a coup. The question I have for those who are sitting on the table, during those Ecowas meetings, during those AU peace and security meetings, what have you done about those coups? Take those 3 coups, multiply by 14. because that's what's happening in the 14 former French colonies. Those are deadly coups that have been taking place for decades. And you, ECOWAS, have done nothing about those coups. I need them to also answer and give us remedy as to how they are going to handle those coups. Make no mistake about it. Those are coups against the African citizens in those countries. And while they discuss what they would like to do with Niger, I would also want them to table those coups and come up with a solution as to what needs to be done. Because behind those coups that I just described from France, there are millions of children who are dying from starvation. There are millions of children who are going to bed with an empty stomach. There are millions of African youth who are unemployed. There are millions of women who are dying while giving birth to another life. I need them to put that on the table as well. If their interests are truly about the Africans, let's look at the global view of the issue. Let's have a bird's eye view of the issue and have a frank and fair and honest discussion about what is really going on in Africa. I do know that I don't think the carnage that's going on in Africa is what ECOWAS is all about. Leadership is about the people. It's about creating a better life for the people. But if you're going to allow one who has committed egregious crimes in Africa continues to have coups, those are coups. Let's call a spade a spade. You can't give France a pass. So also let us know what you intend to do about those ongoing economic and political coups that are being imposed on those 14 French countries, former French colonies by France. So to just talk about what's happening in Niger alone, in isolation, and not go to the root causes of the genesis of why what's happening is happening, that simply does not make any sense. And I would hope military intervention in Niger is not an option. That simply is not something we should do as Africans. There are better ways of dealing with our issues. Our elders must come together. Our elders must have a frank conversation, and let's look at what is ultimately best for the people, not only the people in Niger, but in all former French colonies and ultimately in all African countries, because this moment is calling for unity, meaningful unity of purpose among the African leaders to simply say, guys, this can no longer continue. It simply cannot continue. The people have spoken, and I hope our leadership would listen.